Hi, everyone. Gary here from the National Kidney Foundation, and I'm happy to welcome you to this edition of the National Kidney Foundation's NKF Live series. Today we'll be discussing the topic, and I'm going to try to say this right the first time, immunoglobulin A nephropathy, or IgAN. I prefer saying IgAN, it's a little easier for me. But specifically, IgAN as it relates to something called estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR. So these are pretty big words, but I'm very lucky to be joined by some people today that I think can help us make sense of some of this stuff. So my guests today include Dr. Rafia Chaudhry. Dr. Chaudhry is a nephrologist or a kidney doctor, and she comes to us from the University of California in San Francisco. We're also joined today by Syra Rodriguez. Syra is a research coordinator. She specializes in working with people that are living with kidney diseases, has done a lot of work in the area of IgA nephropathy. And then last but not least, we have Jamila Al-Harizm. Jamila's job is in the medical field. She works as a physician's assistant, but she also happens to be a person living with IgAN, and she's graciously agreed to share her experience with us. So thanks so much for joining me today, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So Dr. Chaudhry, let me start with you. Maybe you can help us set the stage here. Can you explain what estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR, is, and how it's used to help us understand the level of a person's kidney disease?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. So as you said, pretty big words. So, eGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate, is really an indirect way of measuring how well a person's kidneys are working. And it's confusing because we say glomerular filtration rate, and yet we're talking about kidneys. So just to explain that a little bit, a glomerulus is a filtering unit in the kidney. And, between the two kidneys, there are around 1 million glomeruli. So they are very small units that kind of clean the blood of waste products. And then we measure the level of a substance in the blood, such as creatinine or cystatin C, which are essentially waste products or byproducts that the body produces and are cleared by the kidney. And these glomeruli, or the filtering units, actually do the job of cleaning the blood. So once we measure those substances, such as creatinine or cystatin C, to name a few, we can actually put that value in a formula that takes into account the patient's or the individual's body type, sex, and age, and that helps us assess the rate at which the kidney is clearing that substance. And if the kidneys are working well, we expect these levels of creatinine or cystatin C to be low in the blood, and therefore the eGFR, the estimated glomerular filtration rate, will be higher because the kidneys are filtering these products well. And if the kidneys are damaged by any disease process and the kidney function declines, then the level of creatinine and cystatin C will be higher, and the eGFR that's calculated will be lower. And that's kind of explaining how we use the eGFR to measure the kidney function test.
Okay. All right. Now, Jamila, I have a feeling you're familiar with these tests as somebody that has lived with this for a little while. Can you add anything from your personal experience or your perspective that can help lay people, non-medical people like myself, sort of understand eGFR, and especially for people that are just hearing about this for the first time?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Chaudhry explained eGFR perfectly, but in more layman's terms, basically the kidneys are supposed to keep all the good things that your body needs in your body. So if the kidneys are damaged, things like protein, things like blood will show up in your urine. And so that's just another way to think about it. The kidneys, if they're working great, are going to keep everything that your body needs in. But if they get some kind of damage, you're going to start seeing other things leaking out in the urine.
Okay. Syra, let me turn to you now for a second. IgA nephropathy. The way that I understand it was explained to me that it's sort of a collection of proteins in the body that normally would fight germs. We call them antibodies. So that's a good thing. But in this case, they end up collecting in the kidneys and affecting their ability to filter the waste. Does that sound about right?
That is correct, Gary. Yes. And those are one of the main things that we do look at when we are checking for eGFR, is to see how well your kidney is filtrating your blood.
Okay. So Dr. Chaudhry, based on that, can you tell us how eGFR can be used to monitor IgA nephropathy, like it's used to monitor other types of kidney disease?
Yeah, eGFR is kind of used to define stages of kidney disease, and there are 5 stages of kidney disease based on how high the GFR is. The more advanced or the more serious stages are stages 4 and 5, for example. In stages 1 and 2, those are actually good. And so one of the things we do as physicians are kind of looking at the individual's eGFR. And as Jamila mentioned, it suggests when the kidney is doing its job of cleaning the body of waste products, the eGFR level should be good. And then also if we see protein or blood in the urine, that also suggests that there could be a disease process that's going on that's affecting the kidney. And similarly, if somebody has been diagnosed with IgA nephropathy over their lifetime, they can have different, fluctuations in both the blood level of the eGFR or the amount of protein or blood in the urine. And those are some of the tests that we can do to kind of monitor how the kidneys are working or the severity or the degree of the IgA nephropathy at any given time.
Okay, thank you. So Jamila, how often would you say that you got your eGFR measured? Was that like every couple of days? Was it once every 3 months?
Right.
And were there things that happened that would change the frequency? So, were there certain events and they would say, geez, we got to check you every 2 days now, or we don't need to check you for another 6 months. What was your experience with that?
Right. So since I have IgA nephropathy, and I'm in a clinical trial, I get my eGFR checked maybe every 3 months, so once a quarter. But for someone who has regular normal kidney function, no kidney disease, I would recommend they get their eGFR checked at least once a year, and that is done typically with a physical exam that comes with like checking your cholesterol and your glucose level and everything like that. So
right,
yeah,
so they can do this through sort of normal blood testing, right? When you go to the
exactly. When you go see your regular doctor and you go for your annual physical, you can get your eGFR checked along with those other labs that they check.
Great. Okay, so go ahead.
I'd like to add to that. Thank you, Jamila, for sharing your experience. And you're so right that the frequency at which doctor might ask a patient to get their eGFR or urine test checked more often might be right when you're diagnosed with IgA nephropathy, and if there's any kind of treatment that's being started, or if there's adjustment in blood pressure, medications that might require more frequent checking. And then once things are more stable, it definitely gets spaced out a lot more. So it might be every couple of months in the beginning, and then definitely can be spaced out a lot more in frequency once things are more stable.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Chaudhry. Okay, so the results come back from the blood test. Can you guys talk a little bit more about the difference between interpreting a one-time eGFR number compared to following a trend or repeated measures over time? If it's just continually going up, continually going down, and then also on top of that, what types of things can affect these GFR results? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
So, different things can affect eGFR based on what the disease process is, right? So I have IgAN, so whenever I get sick, like with an upper respiratory infection, it can go down. It can go down, but once I get better, it gets better. So definitely getting sick is something with upper respiratory infections is something that can affect eGFR for IgAN patients. But Dr. Chaudhry, maybe you can speak more about diabetes and hypertension and how those things can also affect eGFR.
Yeah, I think, Jamila, you pointed out, right, that trend is key, essentially, in my mind as a physician, I think for all physicians, and that's what I discuss with my patients as well, because eGFR can vary, depending on everyday life, depending on even hydration status. If it's a hot day the body has more insensible, we call fluid loss through sweating, for example. You can have a drop in the eGFR if you get your labs checked that day. It can vary with blood pressure control. So if the blood pressure is very high or low on that specific day when you get your labs checked, there can definitely be a variation. And so if I see there is a sudden change in eGFR for one of my patients that is, different from kind of where their trend has been, I will definitely repeat their blood work, in a week or 2 weeks. And again, trend is key. So essentially kind of following maybe even plotting out a graph is helpful, I find, for patients, because then you're not looking at the tiny blips, which might be up or down, but you're kind of looking at the overall trajectory of the eGFR.
Yeah, and so I hate to keep picking on you, Jamila, but I'm going to ask you, describe your experience with getting your results back, because I'm asking as a person that I have not experienced this, but I would imagine that seeing results that were lower than you're expecting could be kind of scary. And how do you react to that? What do you do about it? Do you reach out to your healthcare provider? Do you have other advice for people that are watching this that might find themselves in a similar situation?
Right. So my eGFR is always on the higher side. So I'm never really surprised when I get it back because it's always on the higher side. But there was one time when I think I had just been newly diagnosed. It was 6 months after I was diagnosed, and I was really sick, and I actually had like frank blood in my urine. I could see the blood in my urine. So I got in touch with my nephrologist right away, and we got blood drawn, and my eGFR was 63. Normally it's like 100 plus, but it was 63. And so that was really, really scary, but it was the first time that I had gotten sick after the diagnosis. And so we checked the eGFR again in a couple of weeks, and I was back to my 95, 100. So what I would tell people, especially when you get results back that are lower than what you expected, always recheck maybe in a month. Ask to get it rechecked because maybe there might be something situational that is going on at that moment to cause your GFR to be lower.
Okay. All right. Great advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think you make a really great point about getting in touch with your physician or clinician, because they can be a really great support to guide you, and then also interpreting that result and what might have affected it. And then the timing in terms of when to repeat it, because if it's truly a decline and they kind of notice that trend, that might need some kind of treatment, as opposed to if it's due to some other factor that is just temporary and it improves, that's a very different situation. So that's really great advice to reach out to the physician that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let me switch over to you, Syra, as a research coordinator. You've been quiet down there for a couple of minutes now, but I wanted to ask you, what other tests are used along with eGFR? At the National Kidney Foundation, I've been here for a long time. I've heard eGFR, or estimated glomerular filtration rate, used to diagnose kidney disease for a long time, but there are other factors, there are other things that you can use to test for this stuff. There's kidney biopsies, there's something called UACR, which I think is urine albumin ratio, 24-hour urine. Can you tell us a little bit more about these different tests and how the eGFR and these other tests differ when it comes to monitoring specifically for IgAN?
Correct. Thank you, Gary, for the question. So there are different measurements. For Jamila, in her case, in order to get diagnosed with IgA, biopsy is required. So that's the only way to actually diagnose somebody with IgA. But there are other tests that we do here in clinic. A lot of people who are suffering with kidney disease have not had, and we get to explain that to them. So one of the first things is a first morning void, which means it's the first urine from the day when you wake up. It's the most concentrated. So that's one measurement. We also do a 24-hour urine, which is when you collect your urine for 24 hours. And it is very important for the patient to know how to collect, because if you do not collect right, those numbers can fluctuate and give us a false number. Other than that, we do blood work as well. Like you said, the eGFR is measured through the blood. So all of these things, and we also do a dipstick sometimes. Like Jamila said, sometimes there's blood in the urine and you haven't noticed. So we do what's called a spot urine when you come in clinic, and we check your urine that way. And if we do see that there's blood in the urine, then that triggers us to do further testing as well.
Thank you. Jamila, have you experienced these other tests as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So, Dr. Chaudhry, let me go back to you for a sec here. At the National Kidney Foundation, there's been a lot of talk lately. I think in general, in our country and in the world, where we're talking a lot about DEI now, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's been specifically in the medical community with regards to kidney disease, there's been a lot of talk about the use of race and ethnicity in evaluating kidney disease. And so when you talk about GFR calculations, the things that you're looking at when you calculate a person's GFR to get those numbers, can you help us understand what's going on right now in the world of kidney disease and how race and ethnicity is being factored in, especially when you're looking at GFR?
Yeah, thanks so much, Gary, for really emphasizing this important topic. So just to explain that a little bit, previously, Black race was used in the formulas that estimate the GFR. And this was done because the initial clinical trials that we had came up with formulas for the eGFR based on the population that they had. They had a smaller number of Black patients, but in that, it suggested that the GFR for Black patients may be higher based on those trials, and that was used for years. Those formulas were used for years. But as we have become more aware of race being a social construct and it being a really complex kind of topic or area, because individuals who self-identify as Black is self-identification. It's not a biological based construct. And then additionally, people who identify as multiracial, how do you account for that? And then another thing to keep in mind in these clinical trials, Black race was the only one that is uniquely used in the formulas. Other races were not used in the formulas to account for how their eGFR might be different. So it was either Blacks versus all others kind of pooled in together. And so this meant that individuals who self-identified as Black, when they were reporting this to their physicians or to the lab and were having their kidney function test, their eGFR was calculated slightly higher for other individuals who might have all the other factors the same, including age, sex, body type, right? And so that would mean, for example, patients with advanced kidney disease, chronic kidney disease stage 4, nearing stage 5, who would otherwise be listed for transplant. If they were Black, they were getting listed later for transplant. And that meant they would accumulate less time on the transplant wait list before they needed to go on dialysis. And that is a huge implication. And so in 2021, there was a National Kidney Task Force, both from the American Society of Nephrology and National Kidney Foundation, that announced a new race-free equation for eGFR, which has been implemented in many hospitals and labs across the country. Of course, whenever there is a change that's implemented, there's downstream effects. One of the downstream effects was now individuals who had self-identified as Black, who had a higher eGFR, all of a sudden now, within a span of a month, when the labs changed, their eGFR dropped by 7-10 points. And that's huge, because nothing has changed with your body, but now you're being told your kidney function is actually lower than what you previously thought it was. So a lot of adjustment for individuals across the board, good for patients who needed to be referred for transplant, and for physicians who could do that referral. However, it required a lot of discussion to enable people to understand, the implications of this new change. But I think a really positive change where we've taken race out of the measurement for glomerular filtration rate. And Jamila, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and your experience as a patient as well.
Yeah, so, whenever I looked at my lab results, it would say eGFR, if Black, then this, if not Black, then this. So my eGFR was always calculated as being higher. And so when these changes were being made, initially I was really surprised, because I said, oh my gosh, so many people now, so many African American people now are going to be under that umbrella of chronic kidney disease. But as Dr. Chaudhry, stated, it's actually a good thing, because it's allowing for quicker services as far as like transplant or treatment for chronic kidney disease. So it's a good thing. It definitely is a good thing.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for answering that one. All right. So what I want to do now, we're in the instance of time here, I want to take a look at some of the questions that folks that have been watching might be asking in the chat feature. I'll remind you, if you have any questions on the subject, you can always post them into the comments section. We're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. In the event that we run out of time, which we will eventually, just know that all the questions will be addressed on the National Kidney Foundation's various social media pages after the program. So let's see what we got here. Looks like here's a question from Andrew in Beaverton, Oregon. Andrew is asking, for a disease like IgA nephropathy, can eGFR be used to see if the disease is progressing, or to see how well a treatment might be working? And is there anything else that is monitored regularly for disease progression? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your question. So eGFR is one aspect of how well the kidneys are functioning, as you mentioned, but I think the other things that might be helpful in assessing if IgA nephropathy itself is progressing is the amount of protein in the urine and the amount of blood. And so those in combination, I think, offer a more complete picture of what's going on in the kidney. Because as we mentioned, eGFR itself can vary with blood pressure control or even hydration status. But if the eGFR has gone down and then the amount of protein in the urine has also gone up, as Jamila mentioned and shared her experience, that might suggest that IgA nephropathy might be a little bit more active. And one thing to add is, we use a kidney biopsy to diagnose IgA nephropathy. But sometimes if individuals have had treatment, or if something changes several years down the line, there are individuals who might need a repeat kidney biopsy. Now, that's not always the case, but especially if there is a change to the treatment, or we plan to use immunosuppression, that might be something to discuss. So eGFR, in summary, is a good initial kind of measure of the kidney function and might suggest that IgA nephropathy is progressing, but it has to be taken in to account with other parameters such as the urine test, the urine blood, the urine protein in combination.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's a question from Lisa in Cocoa Beach, Florida. And Lisa says, thank you, Jamila, for sharing your story. And she's asking, in general, what are my options for treatment if I am living with IgA nephropathy or IgAN?
I think the best thing to do is to get in touch with your nephrologist or your clinician to discuss what the treatments are, because IgA nephropathy varies from person to person. It can be very mild in one person, and that one person may not need any medication and might just be followed on a yearly basis. And then somebody else may have protein and blood in the urine and may need more medication. So it's just, it differs from case to case. So the best thing to do would be to get in touch with your clinician or nephrologist.
Okay. Yeah, always good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we've got time for one more quick one here. Here's one that says, how important is it for me to get these tests done if I don't have any symptoms? Is it really worth the extra time, the money, the poking? That's a good question, because I know from working at the National Kidney Foundation that kidney disease a lot of times is what we call asymptomatic, right? So you don't really feel any pain. You don't have a stomach ache, you don't have back pain. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times you don't have anything. So can somebody help with that question?
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about that one. Yeah, it's so important to go for your annual physical exam, because I had no idea that I had IgA nephropathy, none whatsoever. I was just going for my regular physical. It was 7 months after I had my son, and we do the urine test. My eGFR was perfect, but we did the urine and there was blood and protein in the urine. And so that is kind of how the investigation started. And then ultimately I got the kidney biopsy and had the diagnosis. So I think it's very important to just go for your yearly checkup. And once you go for your yearly checkup, if there's anything wrong with your kidney function, the eGFR, your clinician will let you know and kind of dig further in if need be.
Yep.
Yeah, if I could chime into that, I think it's important to say you know your own body. And when you feel something shift, it's important to reach out to your doctor. There's small telltale signs sometimes, like foam in the urine, and we sometimes dismiss that. But if it's something out of the ordinary, your body's trying to tell you something. So like Jamila said, it is important to speak up and say when something's changed, because a lot of the times we go to the doctor and the first question, how are you doing? And we're like, oh, we're fine. Because in that moment we feel fine. But it's good to jot down and say, hey, something happened, and that will trigger the doctor to probably do further testing. So listen to our bodies is an important thing to do, and speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Great advice. Great. Thank you. All right. One last quick one here. So, and I'll throw this out for the panel. Are there any clinical trials that are happening right now for people with IgAN? And if so, how do I find more information or see if I'm eligible to participate? So one thing I'll say before you guys answer this is we do have a specific page on the National Kidney Foundation's website. You can just search clinical trials, and I believe the page will tell you what clinical trials are all about, how to participate, and all of that stuff. Does anybody have any other thoughts or information on clinical trials that they can offer specifically for this subject?
I would say, like you mentioned, Gary, the National Kidney Foundation, it's a great source to go, or clinicaltrials.gov. Right now, we have so many treatments that will help with your daily schedule. There's infusions, there's sub-Q injections or oral medication, and anything that could help with whatever you feel comfortable with. And it is important to talk to your doctor about it as well. Like you said, everybody's different. Jamila was mentioning not everybody is in the same parameter. Some people have better kidney function than others and might not need such an aggressive treatment. So there's a lot of information out there, and please reach out. We were always happy to give information about treatments.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, Jamila, I'm going to hand it over to you. I want to end with you just because I wanted you to see if is there any sort of message that you want to say for people that are watching, either newly diagnosed, could be a friend or family member, could be a caregiver. What would you like to say to folks that are watching this? It's a tough subject. It's difficult. It's difficult physically and emotionally. Do you have any parting words?
Yes, I do. So, when you first get diagnosed, you almost feel like, wow, I could end up on dialysis or I can end up with a transplant. But everyone's story is different. And so I just encourage you to follow up with your clinician, with your nephrologist, and see what is necessary because each case is different. Everyone is different. And there are people that live with IgAN for years and years, and they do well. I'm thriving. I'm doing well. So just keep your head up and continue to follow up with your clinician and your nephrologist.
Great words. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. And in case we didn't get around to answering the questions of the folks that are watching today, just please check back on the Kidney Foundation's various social media pages. We're going to be posting the answers through the coming days. We will cover all of the questions that are asked. I want to thank our sponsor, Calliditas, for their generous support in making the program possible. I would especially like to thank Dr. Chaudhry, Saira, and Jamila for joining us today and helping make sense of what I know can be a really difficult subject. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
Panel.
And now on behalf of the National Kidney Foundation, I want to wish you all good health.